Gabriella's truck was constantly breaking down, draining her savings with each repair. Little did she know, the local mechanic was sabotaging her truck for profit. But fate had a twist in store when a stranger walked into the roadside diner where she sought refuge. A Michelin star chef who would offer her more than just a meal. Hi everyone, welcome to Tales Unveiled. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. Let's get started. The sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. Doe's Diner. She should have turned around. Daniel pulled his beat-up Subaru into the cracked lot. The smell of exhaust and burnt coffee hit him like a bad memory. This was the kind of place he swore he'd never end up in. All plastic menus and long-haul truckers nursing lukewarm refills. But desperation had a way of changing a man's priorities. He'd been driving for 2 days straight, fleeing the wreckage of his Michelin-starred life in Boston. Fancy restaurants, critics with surgical knives, it all imploded faster than a failed souffle. The diner job wasn't a comeback plan, just a pit stop until he figured out what the hell came next. Inside wasn't as bad as he feared. Sure, the booths were cracked vinyl, the jukebox spewed out weepy country songs, but there was a kind of battered honesty about the place. Faded photos lined one wall, the diner packed back in some long-gone era, chrome curves and big smiles. A waitress came over, no nonsense and surprisingly young for this kind of joint. Coffee? Her voice had a twang that felt refreshingly out of place after years of Boston snobbery. Black is my soul, he muttered, before instantly wincing at the melodrama of it all. Thankfully, she just let out a laugh, pouring a mug that could double as a weapon. Daniel took an obligatory sip, bracing for bitterness. Instead, damn, it was good. Strong, but with a hint of something else, like they actually cared about the beans, not just the caffeine jolt. He scanned the room, a mix of worn-out truckers and locals who hunched over their plates as if sharing secrets. Everyone seemed to have their routine here, their unspoken place in this little ecosystem. The waitress's name tag said Annie plunked down a laminated menu. Specials meatloaf. If you haven't sworn off solid food completely, he blinked, stuck between amused and offended. He was used to servers tiptoeing around fallen culinary heroes. Any good? I need real food, not just coffee-fueled self-pity. Depends. You one of those guys who thinks a sprig of parsley makes it gourmet? A challenge in her eyes. Now, he found himself grinning. Lady, I've seen edible flowers used where they had no business being. Just want to know if it'll keep me driving another 1,000 miles? That seemed to satisfy her. Doy makes it. She doesn't make bad food. The name hung in the air, a quiet tribute. He nodded, suddenly craving something simple, the kind of meal focused on feeding a person, not impressing them. Daniel barely registered the time passing. Annie kept his coffee topped off, slid him a slice of pie that he demolished with surprising gusto. It was the clientele who drew his eye. There was the trucker with faded tattoos, gently teasing Annie over a refill. An old couple bickered over who got the last bite of something, but with the ease of people who'd sparred for decades. And then the woman by the window. At first, he barely noticed her, hunkered down in faded jeans, hair escaping a messy ponytail. Every time a rig roared by, she flinched. He caught a glimpse of her as Annie refilled her water, and even in the dim light, the dark circles under her eyes were shocking. Something about her called out to the fixer in him, the part that always wanted to unravel a recipe, to take broken ingredients and somehow turn them into a satisfying meal. Problem over there? He gestured towards the woman, keeping his voice low. Annie gave a soft sigh. That's Gabriella. Drives cross-country, hauling livestock mostly. Been a regular for longer than she should, if you ask me. The trucking world was no joke, especially for a woman alone in those isolated stretches. What's the story? Annie glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Bad luck, that's all. Truck keeps breaking down, stays at the cheap motel, cause Doy gives her a discount every time. Os Vipravlini text bez time coded. Annie plunked down a laminated menu. Specials meatloaf. If you haven't sworn off solid food completely, he blinked, stuck between amused and offended. He was used to servers tiptoeing around fallen culinary heroes. Any good? I need real food, not just coffee-fueled self-pity. Depends. Are you one of those guys who thinks a sprig of parsley makes it gourmet? A challenge in her eyes. Now, he found himself grinning. Lady, I've seen edible flowers used where they had no business being. Just want to know if it'll keep me driving another 1,000 miles. That seemed to satisfy her. Doy makes it. She doesn't make bad food. The name hung in the air, a quiet tribute. He nodded, suddenly craving something simple. The The kind of meal focused on feeding a person, not impressing them. Daniel barely registered the time passing. Annie kept his coffee topped off, slid him a slice of pie that he demolished with surprising gusto. It was the clientele who drew his eye. There was the trucker with faded tattoos gently teasing Annie over a refill. An old couple bickered over who got the last bite of something, but with the ease of people who'd sparred for decades. And then the woman by the window. At first, he barely noticed her, hunkered down in faded jeans, hair escaping a messy ponytail. Every time a rig roared by, she flinched. He caught a glimpse of her as Annie refilled her water, and even in the dim light, the dark circles under her eyes were shocking. Something about her called out to the fixer in him, the part that always wanted to unravel a recipe, to take broken ingredients and somehow turn them into a satisfying meal. Problem over there, he gestured towards the woman, keeping his voice low. Annie gave a soft sigh. That's Gabriella. Drives cross-country, hauling livestock mostly. Been a regular for longer than she should, if you ask me. The trucking world was no joke, especially for a woman alone in those isolated stretches. What's the story? Annie glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Bad luck, that's all. Truck keeps breaking down, stays at the cheap motel cause Doy gives her a discount every time. Scent she makes goes into repairs. It ain't sustainable. The gears started turning in Daniel's head. Sure, he was a chef, not a mechanic, but he'd spent enough nights under the hoods of temperamental used cars out of necessity. A puzzle was a puzzle, no matter if it was made of produce or pistons. Let me buy her a coffee, he blurted out, surprised by his own impulse. He wasn't the type to play white knight, especially not to a woman who'd likely swat away the gesture like a pesky fly. Annie smirked. Might be up for that, though don't expect much conversation. She needs more than a caffeine kick. There was a flicker of concern in her eyes. Daniel signaled, and Annie walked over to Gabriella's booth, whispering something. The trucker eyed him with a mix of weariness, then gave a nod. She hadn't thrown the coffee back in his face, at least. As Gabriella shuffled over, he tried not to stare. She was younger than he'd expected, the kind of tough that came from living on the edge, not from gym workouts. He pushed away the chef part of him, the part that automatically assessed ingredients. This wasn't about judging, but helping somehow. Heard things are rough, he started. Gabriella sank into the booth. That's an understatement, her voice was rough. Any idea what the issue is? A long shot, but it was a place to start. She shook her head. Something they're not telling me straight. Every other week, it's another breakdown. Small stuff, but adds up faster than I can haul loads. Now he heard it, anger simmering inside him. He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket and a borrowed pen. Humor me. Write down everything they fixed this month. It took some coaxing, but Gabriella finally relented, scribbling a list of parts and repairs. He scanned it, his chef's mind working in overtime, translating the mechanical jargon into a familiar pattern. Some of this is wrong, he muttered. It's like they're going for the most temporary fixes, guaranteed to screw up again quickly. To Gabriella's, and his heart sank. They were being played. Word spread quietly, carried by Annie's network of gossiping regulars. Out in the lot, an unlikely group formed. Gabriella, looking more determined than defeated, stood at the center. Gus surprisingly turned out to have a photographic memory for engine specs. Two local ranchers who often used Gabriella for hauling livestock agreed discreet cameras in the garage weren't the craziest idea. The garage wasn't expecting scrutiny. 3 days in, hidden cameras captured the mechanic doing the old switcheroo, pocketing the good parts for resale. The confrontation was tense. A dozen witnesses packed into the garage's office. Gabriella laid out the evidence, Annie and Gus flanking her like bodyguards. A name slipped out, the man who supplied the faulty parts, who likely had a deal going with more than one garage. In the end, it wasn't about legal battles or grand victories. It was about Gabriella getting her truck fixed right. A stack of IOUs from folks ready to help make that happen, and a greasy envelope full of cash shoved into her hand as she was practically ushered out of the garage. Back at Doy's, over mugs of the surprisingly good coffee, Daniel made a confession. This wasn't some detour for me, he admitted. I was done, burnt out. This place. He gestured around the diner, taking in the warmth that had nothing to do with the chipped mugs or the faded photos. It reminded me of something I forgot. Maybe you stick around. Gabriella finished the question hanging in the air. Got a hunch Doy wouldn't mind another hand, especially one that can sling a decent omelet alongside a tune-up. He couldn't help but grin, a genuine one. The chef, the trucker, and the diner. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the one he needed. Months later, Doy's was barely recognizable. The chipped vinyl was replaced by seats salvaged from an old Chevy truck. The jukebox now blasted out a mix of country and surprisingly good indie bands. The menu, that's where Daniel's influence shone. Local produce, hearty, but with a chef's flair. The truckers at first swore they'd starve, then lined up for seconds once they got a taste. Daniel wasn't a chef here, not in the fancy title sense. He taught Gus how to bake proper bread, Gabriella how to quick pickle veggies to liven up her road snacks. One evening, a familiar car pulled into the lot. The businessman from that first day, looking a little less polished, a little more desperate this time around. Daniel braced for accusations, a demand for some kind of payback for the trouble his presence had triggered. Instead, the man held out a worn leather briefcase. "Heard you're the one to talk to," he said, his voice surprisingly humble. "My company, we haul high-value livestock. Ran into the same racket Gabriella did, garages up and down the coast. Word is, you folks broke the chain, at least for a while." Inside the briefcase wasn't cash, but contracts. A proposal for Gabriella to consult, find honest garages, train his drivers to spot the early signs of sabotage. A preventive measure they desperately needed. Beside it, another envelope addressed to Daniel, not payment, but a donation to a local charity that helped feed hungry families. It felt like a peace offering. Yet as the businessman got back in his car, Daniel couldn't help feeling satisfied. He'd left his mark on the glitzy world that had tried to break him, carving out a kind of victory even Michelin stars couldn't measure. He found Gabriella by her truck, humming along to a song he didn't recognize, a new toolbox in the back, a gift from the ranchers. "Fancy visitors tonight," he quipped, handing her the businessman's offer. She scanned the papers, then a grin spread across her face. "Consultation gig, huh? Never thought teaching would be my thing, but turns out I got opinions." There was a lightness in her voice he hadn't heard in ages. Daniel cleared his throat, a touch of nervousness he couldn't quite explain. "Lot of spare rooms above the diner go unused? Doy'd probably let you stay cheap while you figure out your next move?" Gabriella leaned against the truck, studying him. Finally, she said, "Funny thing about spare rooms, they get mighty lonely with just one person in them." The past was still there, a shadow between them. But the warmth of the diner, the smell of fresh bread, it felt like a new beginning. Maybe this wasn't the end of the road, but the start of a whole new journey together. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments. While you're at it, check out the video currently on your screen. See you next time. Her head snapped up, a spark of hope in those tired eyes. "You sure you ain't just saying, 'Look, I'm no mechanic'?" He held up his hands, preempting the expectation he couldn't meet. "But even in a kitchen, there's the quick fix and the thing you do right. Maybe they're counting on you not knowing the difference." Gabriella hesitated, clearly torn. "This place, it ain't the kind where you can bargain, even if you're right." He sensed there was more to that story, but didn't push. That was the trouble with small towns. Everyone knew something about your business, debts, and favors, tangled like old phone lines. The diner door creaked open, a blast of cold air cutting through the warmth. A man swaggered in, Annie's shoulders stiffened, but Gabriella didn't even look up, resignation etched on her face. "Just passing through, sweetheart," the man drawled, flashing a smile that was all teeth. "Didn't know this place served up sights as fine as you." Daniel's instincts kicked in. Years in kitchens honed his reflexes not for fights, but for moving fast before disaster struck. He wasn't about to let some jackass intimidate a woman who just wanted to do her job and drink her coffee in peace. "Gabriella's got her coffee," he announced. "Food might take a while, but you fella need to keep on moving." The man turned his attention to Daniel, taking him in with a mocking tone. "Well now, ain't you the chivalrous type? Pity?" he sneered. "A lady like this needs help she ain't directly asking for, if you catch my drift." Gabriella was standing now, fists clenched. She spoke low, but every word landed like a hammer blow. "The only help I need is getting my damn truck fixed right, and creeps like you leaving me the hell alone." The diner felt unbearably small. If this was a city, the guy would back off, sensing the bad press wasn't worth the hassle. But here, it could get ugly fast. Then came a sound Daniel couldn't have planned for. A sharp click, followed by Annie's voice, cold as steel. "One more step and this old shotgun of Doy's gets a workout." The man backed off and left immediately. Annie, after disarming the shotgun, made a point of hovering protectively. Gus ambled over, less gruff than usual, and muttered something about good to see some folks still got fight in them. Daniel had a half-formed plan, but it hinged on Gabriella trusting him enough to even consider it. While she ate the bowl of hearty stew, he laid it out as simply as he could. "Those repairs," he started, keeping his voice low. "They weren't just bad luck. Someone's playing you, Gabriella, and I think I can prove it." Her eyes widened, then hardened. "Even if you're right, who around here am I going to take this to? Sheriff Joe is tight with half the folks who likely profit off me breaking down." This wasn't just about fixing a truck. It was about restoring a small piece of faith in a broken system. That's the thing about fancy restaurants and roadside diners. Sometimes the problems are more fundamentally the same than anyone wants to admit. "We fix it ourselves," he said the words, surprising even himself a little. Gabriella gave a harsh laugh. "Right, me, a trucker, and you, fancy chef with your soft hands, ain't exactly a crack mechanic team, is it? Not alone." He held up a hand before she could continue. "But Annie knows her way around tools. Gus, I bet he rebuilt his first tractor before he could drive it. This whole damn town sees you getting taken for a ride. Maybe enough of them are sick of it too." It was an audacious plan. The chef who ran away to escape the pressure, now willingly stepping into a small-town brawl he only vaguely understood. Gabriella studied him, then spoke. "If we find proof, solid stuff, that'll hold up. What do you want in return?" "A place to sleep that ain't my car," he said with a wry smile, then grew serious. "And you learn to cook one damn thing besides what comes out of a microwave. Your body deserves better than that." Gabriella smiled. It was a start. The next morning, while pretending he was fetching supplies from town, Daniel made a detour to the only other garage within a 2-hour drive. His rusty charm and a carefully practiced story of car trouble got him chatting with a young mechanic. The guy sketched out a list of parts, cheap substitutes, the kind designed to fail just outside the warranty period. Back at Doe's, he compared the list.